Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. So picture this. How does a meticulously researched, incredibly successful, and totally authorized biography of one of history's greatest innovators end up being absolutely despised by his closest friends and family? It's wild, right? Today, we're unpacking this massive mystery behind the dueling biographies of Steve Jobs. We'll look at the definitive authorized text and the sheer earthquake of a backlash it provoked. To really understand this controversy, we have to rewind to 2004. Right before his very first surgery for pancreatic cancer, Steve Jobs called up the acclaimed biographer Walter Isaacson with a pretty unexpected request. He wanted Isaacson to write his life story. When Isaacson asked him why now after a literal lifetime of guarding this privacy like a hawk, Jobs simply said, "I wanted my kids to know me. I wasn't always there for them, and I wanted them to know why and to understand what I did." It's just a raw, incredibly emotional starting point. Okay, let's dive into this. Walter Isaacson is a heavyweight. He's a master biographer who had just written about Benjamin Franklin and Albert Einstein, and he brought that exact same rigorous, objective, historical methodology to Jobs' life. We're talking more than 40 interviews with Jobs himself over 2 years, plus hundreds of conversations with his friends, his enemies, his competitors, the whole shebang. But the absolute kicker? Zero editorial control. Aside from picking the cover photo, Jobs completely refused to read the manuscript before it hit the shelves. He gave Isaacson total, unfiltered access. Section 1, the authorized Genesis and the Isaacson account. So Isaacson takes this unprecedented access and delivers a massive, totally unvarnished look at a guy who was undeniably brilliant, but famously abrasive. He walks us right through the origin story. Jobs was adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs, grew up in the Bay Area, and just totally soaked up the 60s counterculture and the early electronics hobbyist scene. He teams up with Steve Wozniak to build the Blue Box, literally a device to hack the phone company for free long-distance calls. It was this perfect mix of engineering genius and pure rebellious hustle. And from there, boom, they found Apple in a garage in 1976. Isaacson shows us that this rebellious streak wasn't just a phase, it was baked right into his DNA. Now, a massive pillar of Isaacson's book revolves around this concept that Apple engineers actually borrowed from Star Trek. They called it the reality distortion field. Basically, it was Jobs' superpower, his ability to convince himself and everyone else in the room that some totally impossible deadline or crazy design was achievable just through sheer conviction and charisma. But Isaacson frames this as a huge double-edged sword. Sure, it drove absolutely incredible product breakthroughs, but tragically, it also fueled a fatal denial. Isaacson points out that this very same distortion field led to a devastating 9-month delay in Jobs seeking conventional treatment for his cancer. And this brilliantly illustrates Isaacson's core thesis, which really comes down to a few main ideas. There's the intersection of technology and the liberal arts, and his total obsession with controlling both the hardware and the software. But look at that third point, the binary genius or idiot worldview. Isaacson argues that Jobs' worst traits, the volatility, the harshness, the way he categorized literally everyone as either brilliant or completely worthless, those weren't just accidental flaws. They were causally tied to his creative genius. According to Isaacson, you just can't have the visionary without the incredibly difficult man. They're a package deal. Now here is where things get fascinating. The dates, the specs, the corporate rivalries, they are all spot on. Isaacson nailed the historical record. But if the facts were so undeniably accurate, why did Apple's inner circle feel so betrayed? Why did this authorized biography cause an absolute meltdown of resentment from the people who actually loved and worked with him every day? Which brings us right into Section 2, the Apple backlash. The pushback wasn't just quiet grumbling. It was immediate and severe. Laureen Powell Jobs, Steve's widow, hated how much the book focused on his temper. She even actively fought against the Hollywood movie adaptation. Apple CEO Tim Cook famously called the book a tremendous disservice, saying it just painted a picture of a greedy egomaniac and completely ignored the mentor who spent countless hours coaching his team. And Johnny Ive, Apple's legendary design chief and Jobs' closest friend at the company, he bluntly said his regard couldn't be lower for the book. They all felt the exact same way. Isaacson perfectly captured the brilliant jerk of the 1980s, but completely missed the empathetic, seasoned executive that Jobs actually became in the 2000s. What we're seeing here is a huge clash between factual accuracy and narrative truth. Tech insiders felt Isaacson looked at the creation of the iPhone through the exact same dramatic lens as a messy corporate firing. He wanted the conflict, so he prioritized conflict over nuance. And this got amplified 100 times over in the 2015 Aaron Sorkin movie. Sorkin took the most dramatic, painful parts of Isaacson's book, like Jobs' early denial of his daughter Lisa, and basically made that the entire plot, leaning way into theatrical fiction. Let's move to and see how this builds, because Apple's executive team felt so burned by this portrayal that they did something unprecedented. They actively supported a second biography. It's a totally different lens. Isaacson gives us the unchanging genius, a guy who succeeded in spite of his terrible behavior. But Brent Schlender and Rick Tesseley's counter-narrative, Becoming Steve Jobs, gives us the evolution of a leader.
Section 3. Becoming Steve Jobs and the Wilderness Years.
Schlender and Tetzeley's whole argument is that the volatile, hot-headed kid of the 1980s literally never could have built the iPhone. He had to change. We all know the garage era and the big hero's return in '97, but Becoming Steve Jobs really zeroes in on the middle part of this timeline. They call it the wilderness years. After getting painfully kicked out of Apple in '85, he founded Next, which struggled, and he bought Pixar. Having to learn how to manage incredibly sensitive, brilliant, creative talent at Pixar while surviving the hard knocks at Next was a crucible. It fundamentally forced him to grow up into a patient, strategic CEO. And honestly, there's no better example of this profound personal growth than a story from 2009. Jobs was dying. He desperately needed a transplant. Tim Cook finds out that they share a rare blood type, goes to Jobs, and literally offers him a portion of his own liver. Instead of taking it, Jobs yells, "I'll never let you do that. I'll never do that." This second book uses this incredible micro-narrative as undeniable proof of the deep empathy, loyalty, and protective instinct he had developed for his team. It's a complete 180 from the selfish egomaniac of his early days.
Section 4. Shared Core Philosophies.
So the crucial point is that despite these two books fighting fiercely over his emotional growth, they perfectly align on his operational style, specifically his absolute belief in focus through subtraction. Think about this. When Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, the company was a bloated mess, selling something like 40 different product models. Jobs came in and ruthlessly slashed that down to just 4. 4. He believed to his core that saying no to really good ideas was infinitely more important than saying yes, because your attention is always your scarcest resource. Both books also completely revere his design philosophy. He treated taste as a literal competitive advantage. The guy was obsessed with unseen internal details. Like, he demanded the inside of a computer look beautiful, even if a customer would never, ever see it. Every user experience had to be aesthetically perfect. In fact, the back cover of Isaacson's book uses this famous 1984 photo by Norman Seeff. It shows Jobs sitting on the floor in the lotus position with the original Mac in his lap. That one image captures exactly what both biographies agree on. Jobs was the ultimate, perfect intersection of raw, cutting-edge technology and Zen-like artistic simplicity. And this brings us to our final section, the final verdict. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how you actually use these two books together. If you want the strict, undeniable historical record, the dates, the specs, the raw timeline of the what, Isaacson's objective account is absolutely mandatory reading. But if you want the why, if you want to understand how a volatile, harsh young man actually evolved into a highly effective, fiercely loved leader, you have to read Becoming Steve Jobs for that inner circle perspective. So what does this all mean? Who was the real Steve Jobs? Was he the uncompromising, harsh genius who just bent reality to his will? Or the evolved, deeply loyal mentor who learned to nurture talent? Well, honestly, maybe the most valuable takeaway from this whole explainer is that no brilliantly complex, deeply flawed human being can ever be captured by just one single narrative. It takes multiple lenses to even begin to see the whole picture. Keep asking those questions, keep challenging the narrative, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.